Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Allie Thomas-Fannin. She's a psychiatrist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, A Psychiatrist Crashes into Telemedicine During the Pandemic. Allie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
So we'll get into the article in a bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
I am a psychiatrist. I am currently in Vincennes, Indiana, which is where I've been for the last 4 years. I work for Good Samaritan Hospital and the Samaritan Center, which is a community mental health center in southern Indiana. So we have a capture area of about 4 counties and then even wider area of about 11 counties. So that's 250 to 300,000 people, mostly in a rural population. The city I live in is about 20,000 people. I'm originally from Kentucky, so I'm originally from about 2 hours south of where I am now. I did my undergraduate at Haverford College, and I was a political science major, actually. And then I decided that I wanted to go to med school. So I got a second degree from Austin Peay State, which is where I met my husband. And we've been together for 13 years now, 14 almost. We've got 3 kids, too. And he came with me to med school. So we kind of have been doing this whole journey together. So I think it's nice to have a partner who's kind of outside of the whole medicine game. And so I did my med school at University of Louisville. I did residency in general psychiatry at Duke University. And then I left Duke and North Carolina to kind of come back to a little bit around my home area. At that point, they were starting a residency program here in Southern Indiana for psychiatry residents with a goal to train physicians in rural practice. So we have a family medicine residency, we have an internal medicine residency that has already started, and my psychiatry residency that's now in its 2nd year. So we have a class of PGY2s and a new class of PGY1s. And I'm the program director for that program. So, and everything that kind of goes into being an ACGME program and training people in psychiatry, but we're doing it in kind of a rural population, which presents its own unique opportunities, I feel like, for training. So that's kind of how I got here. I have 3 kids, 4 dogs, 2 guinea pigs, a cat, and a garden with squash that are taking over everything. And what I love about where I am now is that I live on 11 acres, kind of outside of a smaller city, and I don't have a lot of the hassles that I found in bigger cities like traffic. I no longer have tolerance for traffic, I think, kind of a small town feel. So I really love where I am right now.
All right. Now, I want to talk about your Kevin MD article, A Psychiatrist Crashes into Telemedicine During the Pandemic. So for those who haven't read your article, can you walk my audience through it and perhaps share how the pandemic has affected you in your practice?
Oh, yes. So I work in community mental health, and we had very little telemedicine involvement, mostly because of a lot of the restrictions that had been imposed on telemedicine before the pandemic, like we couldn't prescribe a stimulant to a kid in a rural area unless we saw them face to face. And that kind of presented its own challenges prior to the pandemic. And I had never done a lot of telepsychiatry in the past. And I have always I've enjoyed living in a rural area, and there's not a lot of psychiatrists around. So I've always kind of been a little bit different compared to, I think, my fellows. And I wrote about in the article going through an exercise where I discovered just how different I was than a lot of folks, but that didn't mean that I couldn't have something to contribute to the field or something, and something to contribute. So I'm a very outgoing person. I'm good face to face, and I'd always felt like comfortable with that. And then we kind of moved into telepsychiatry, and since I'm always open to new things, it's part of my personality structure. I was like, all right, we're going to do this. It's going to be great, and it's going to work. And I hated it. And I felt alone in hating it at first. And that a lot of folks who had done telepsych and my colleagues and were like, oh, it's wonderful. You'll love it. It's great. It's so convenient. You don't have a commute, which is always appealing to me. But I found that I was having a lot of difficulty engaging in telepsych as I was in-person practice. And I wondered if I was the only one that kind of felt this way. I now know I kind of am not, and I'm a huge advocate of increasing access to care. So if telepsych increases access to care, I am all for it. I'm not sure it's my full-time gig, but it could definitely be my part-time gig because I'm still doing it. In fact, you're looking at my office from home that I do my telepsych in, and it's just as messy as my office at work. Patients like to point that out sometimes on the Zoom. And I found that I might have been facing some challenges that were more unique to kind of crashing into this, but also being in a rural area. a lot of my patients live in places where there's no high-speed internet access. They don't have high-speed internet. It's not available. They couldn't buy it if they wanted it. The Verizon tower is too far away, so their phones don't work as well, their cell service. So I was running into massive amount of technical problems. The fact that the infrastructure just wasn't there for a lot of telework, and trying to make sure that I was taking care of people at the level that I'm used to while doing it in this new medium, I found to be challenging. And so that was kind of the inspiration for writing what I wrote. As I've been doing it, we're now in month 5, I think, I've lost count. We've been sending out surveys to our staff because I'm part of a community mental health center. So I'm with therapists, and some of the therapists are like, this is great. I want to keep doing it. And others are like, this is not working for me very well. About half my patients can't even connect, and because of the population that we're taking care of. And some are waiting until we go back to full office to actually see people. And some therapies like EMDR are difficult to deliver over this medium. Not impossible, but very challenging. So I found that we're facing some challenges that maybe other places are facing, and facing some challenges that might be more unique to our rural context. Like somebody was like in the middle of a cornfield doing a talk with me or doing their appointment because that was where their cell service was the best. Sure. And I was like, oh, wow, this is where there's a Verizon tower over there. Okay. So I've done appointments in the most unusual places, and I've sometimes found what has been also challenging in the realm of psychiatry is a lot of my patients have prepared for their appointment, right? And driving to the clinic and sitting in the waiting room and filling out the questions that I have, like I have questions that I give people and they're on yellow sheets because I find it less distracting, is helpful for that, to kind of prepare for what they're going to say to me. And sometimes on the appointments, it takes them a little bit to adjust to the fact that they're having a psych appointment right now, right? So, I'm in my psychiatry appointment and my kids are yelling and my dogs are barking and it's chaos, right? Sure. And that gives me a little bit of insight into their world, but also makes it somewhat more difficult for some of them to engage. So what I found is they've gotten more used to it over time. And so some of them are like, all right, I can't do my appointment today because there's too much going on at my house. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll reschedule you, right? Or we'll schedule you for an in-office because we're trying to do more in-office. And I'm wearing my headband that has the buttons on it for the mask to save my ears. So as we kind of go forward, I feel like we're facing some challenges that maybe other places don't have to face as much.
I think what you said about some physicians being comfortable with telemedicine and some aren't is really my experience as well, especially in primary care. Now, over the past few months, you've been doing telepsychiatry. Are there any tips that you could share with other clinicians who still may not be comfortable with the virtual format?
I've gotten more comfortable with it. I feel like some things are harder to do on tele and some things might be a little bit easier. Like I had some patients engage more on the tele. Some of my therapists who do marriage counseling said they have to look at each other's faces now. Like they don't have to in an office setting really, but they do when they're looking at the Zoom. So they're noticing that marriage counseling might be a little bit better actually in some of these formats. So I think there's pluses and minuses. And to folks who are having some trouble taking the leap, I think it's important to meet people where they are as much as possible. So my patient who said, I'm absolutely not doing this, I said, okay, you can come into the clinic and we'll wear masks. So I think some flexibility is helpful and kind of assessing which patients it might be appropriate for and which patients it might not be. Okay. Like I see kids as part of, because I'm like the only doc around for a long time, and we just hired a new child guy and I'm so happy. But it's hard to find a child psychiatrist, and I'm a general psychiatrist, so I've got some child training despite not being an expert in child, and I have people I can consult with. The kids are very difficult to do over the Zoom because they're not as engaged with the screen because then there's too many things going on in their environment. So the mom is like following them around, like, see how bad he is. And, like, all right, I get it. I'm getting vertigo. Sure. But I feel like meeting the patient where they are and kind of problem solving those as it comes can be very helpful. And testing and finding a platform that you're comfortable with. Like we used Zoom because it was just easier for my patients to understand. There were some other models out there and they didn't work. They would like work well on iPhones, but not on other things like FaceTime is apparently very nice. I don't have an iPhone, so I can't use FaceTime. So we had to get a platform that was comfortable for everyone. If one integrates into your EMR, that's better. Our EMR doesn't integrate with anything. But we're switching to Epic in a few months, which I'm told is integrating much better with video visit, and kind of seeing what patients it's appropriate for and which patients it's not. Sure. And like I'm an advocate for people being able to do and practice the way that is the most comfortable for them. and figuring out what works for them. And it might be a slow transition. Like I've got some people who started with phone calls with me, and now 3 months later, they're like, I figured out the Zoom because my grandchild helped me, right? And that can be helpful too. But getting the right tech support, very helpful.
We're talking to Allie Thomas-Fannin. She's a psychiatrist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, A Psychiatrist Crashes into Telemedicine During the Pandemic. Allie, whenever the pandemic ends, do you see telepsychiatry continuing past that?
I think we've opened the box and we're not going to close it again. So I think a lot of the restrictions on telemedicine before were not very evidence-based as far as like their helpfulness or fears of harm. I also work in addictions. So like I'm sitting for the addiction medicine boards, hopefully in October, if I can ever get a testing center. I do Suboxone, I do buprenorphine, I do Vivitrol. Our community mental health center uses lots of long-acting injectables. So there are some things that people have to come in for, like drug tests and things, but I don't think we're going back. And I hope we don't go back to the old way of like so many restrictions that it basically shut us down from ever doing it. Our center just stopped doing tele when they increased so many restrictions that it wasn't practical anymore. So I think any way that we can increase psychiatric care is better. And we still don't have parity for psychiatric care. And I think that's going to be a big issue going forward, getting parity with telepsych. But if it increases people's access, I'm okay with it. Sure. And figuring out the best way to do it and prepping patients for how to prepare for an appointment on a Zoom. And I think when we have more experience under our belts, we'll figure out things that work and things that don't. Some of the concerns that I had going forward were doctor shopping was too easy, especially for controlled substances. I need to know what people are taking and if they're getting them in states that don't have PWPs or whatever your prescription monitoring service is, that can be difficult for my field because I don't know what people are on. And so I can't help them. And then also racing to the bottom of like having poorly trained providers doing things on Zoom because they're legal in one state and not in another. And that can be, I think, challenging too. But I think the box is open and we're not going to close it back again.
Sure. And my final question, Allie, do you have a take-home message that you want to share with the Kevin MD audience?
I think the take home from my whole experience and the fact that I'm a program director for a rural residency where most rural areas have trouble recruiting because they don't train or they don't tend to train docs. And I feel like every patient having the ability to see a physician in the format that they need at the time that they need, including face-to-face. I have some patients who hate this and they can't engage very well with the screen. And so I don't want them to be forced into tele if it's not their cup of tea because their insurer no longer pays for other things like face-to-face. So that is also the Pandora's box that I'm worried about opening. But I want people to be able to have a doctor next door to share in the culture, to know that the farmer's market closed. And so, my income for that day isn't going. And I'm like, yeah, I'm really disappointed about the farmer's market too. And being able to kind of engage people in those communities where they live, because community resources are so important for my field. And being able to have what you need in your environment is important. And if I'm a physician sitting thousands of miles away, I might not be able to engage with that as well. So I feel like people should have still the option of the doctor next door, while also being able to increase access to other services that maybe this population doesn't have access to, like addictions or like pediatric specialists are very difficult to recruit to rural areas. And so having those access, but still maintaining an ability to have a doctor next door.
Allie, thank you so much for sharing your insight and time, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.